Hey guys, today we're going to be doing a how to change your oil tutorial video. We're going to be looking at two different cars, a car from the 1980s and a car from 2009 or 2008, my wife's daily and my daily. So you'll get to see that the basic process hasn't changed in the past 20 or 30 years and probably won't change in the future for the majority of cars. So let's get started. First, we'll take a look at a couple of the items that you're going to need to do this. Alright, first up, you're going to need your oil and an oil filter. The maintenance for your vehicle may say that you can change the filter every other time. Personally, I change the filter every time because I don't drive my cars very many miles, so I usually only have to change the oil about once a year. You will need some tools. You don't need a huge tool set to do this. You basically just need one wrench. It's going to be whatever size fits your oil drain plug, or you can use a socket. But since I'm a drifter, I've got a couple of pieces of full kit. This is sort of my mobile kit, so I'll be using it. If you are a weakling like me, it might help you to have an oil filter wrench. This will help you to get the old oil filter off if it doesn't come off right away. I recommend you get some gloves. You certainly don't have to have them. Next, you'll need a way to get under the car. If your car is really tall, or it's lifted, or if you've got a truck, you can just crawl under it. Otherwise, you're going to want to use a jack. You can either use your factory jack, or if you've got a permanent garage jack like me, you can do that. I recommend that you use jack stands so that you don't kill yourself if the car happens to fall off of it. Or you can simply drive your car up onto ramps. Now you can buy ramps like these. They're plastic, they're lightweight, they nest together so that they only take up the space of one of the two. Or you could build one out of wood, which is a lot cheaper but a little bit more of an obstruction in your garage. Last but not least, you're going to need some sort of an oil container to catch the oil coming out of the engine, and then this is going to let you take that oil up to your local auto shop, like an AutoZone or Advanced or Napa, where they can dispose of the used oil for you. This is Miss Kame car. It's a 2008 Toyota Prius. And the first thing that you'll need to do when doing an oil change is reach in here and grab your service manual. Inside you'll find your owner's manual, and you can flip through. This one is coming apart at the seams, and check the oil viscosity that is recommended. You'll also be able to find out how much oil you need to purchase. There are other things you can do with oil viscosity. You don't have to use what the manufacturer recommends. 90% of the time it's great, but if you'd like to hear a little bit more about how oil works and different concerns for oil viscosity, leave me a comment and I can go into that a little bit more. So this car takes 4 quarts of 5W30. Now that you know that, you can run over to your local auto parts store and pick up both the oil and the filter. So I decided to take the Prius up to AutoZone to get the filter. It's always kind of nice to drive a hybrid car. They feel interesting. They have amenities like air conditioning that a lot of my cars tend not to have. One of these days I'm going to install a hydro e-brake on this car, with or without my wife's permission, and do the electric slide. Alright, so if you're old school, you can look up your car in here. Prius. So then you pick which filter you want and get your part number. Peace out. We got the stuff. Now we go do the work and come right back to drop off the used oil.
You can't see it. It's electric. You gotta feel it. It's electric.
So now that we have the oil and the filter, we're going to put the car onto ramps. I decided to use those because they're a little bit easier. So you're going to position the ramps and then drive up onto them once you get them both in place. Next up, we need to get under the car and identify 2 things. 1, the oil drain plug under the engine, and 2, the oil filter location. Let's take a quick look at an oil filter to figure out what that's going to look like, and then we can go find those 2. So here's the oil filter that we ended up with. They actually had a deal with Mobil 1 where they didn't receive the regular part number. So to fill the order, Mobil 1 actually sent them this extended performance filter, which they were selling at the same price as their regular, because it really wasn't their fault. It was a Mobil 1 supply and logistics issue. I used to do production control for Denso Group companies, so I understand those pains well. So this is the oil filter for a Prius. Most oil filters all look the same, it's just a matter of them being smaller or larger. There's some basic directions on how to use them, but we're going to be going under the engine to look for something about this size and shape, and there's generally only one thing that meets the criteria under there. So let's go take a look. These ramps didn't get as high as I'd hoped. So we're under the car, looking through. Right here I have identified the oil filter. It goes right onto the engine. And then right here I've identified the oil pan. So this is the bottom of the engine. All the oil is collected by gravity down at the bottom of the pan. And if we come over here, we will see that there is a bolt. This is the drain plug. So if we take this bolt out, all the oil that's in the engine is going to fall out the hole. We'll collect that. Then we'll put the cap back on. Then we'll take the oil filter off, collect any oil that is in it, because there will be some sitting there. Then we'll replace the oil filter. At that point, all the old oil will be out of the system, and we will have everything ready to fill up with new. Then we will be done. So first up, we're going to grab a socket of the appropriate size, pull this bolt, and use our oil collector to catch the oil as it comes out. You can generally loosen these first, break them loose, and then once they're loose, we'll slide our oil catch can under, like so. I prefer to use a glove for this part, but we will empty this out. And there goes the oil. This is an opportunity to check the color of the oil. Typically by the time you do your change, it's going to be really dark brown. And that indicates that it's full of contaminants and it's doing what it needs to do, so it's time for the change. So we'll give that a couple of minutes to all drain out. Make sure that you position your pan in such a way that when this flow stops going out and starts going straight down, that you're still catching it, otherwise you'll come back to a big puddle. I'm going to take some time and go cool off inside for a little bit. So that's pretty much all drained out. Here's our drain plug, which we've cleaned up. We're just going to screw that right back in. Clean off the bottom of the pan and tighten it down very gently, especially for me because I happen to be using this really long wrench that doesn't need to be, applying that much torque. So we'll wait for it to get a little tight. Alright, so we tighten it down gently, like so. That takes care of that. Now we move on to the oil filter. Alright, so here's our oil filter. We have moved our oil catch can so that it's going to collect any oil that comes out, which I guarantee some will. This is going to be the same process as we used for the drain plug. See if we can loosen it by hand, which I doubt. It's kind of awkward to get in there. So I'm going to utilize this tool, which just gives me a little bit of leverage. And okay, that's being a boss. You can also purchase these, which I happen to have one that fits the Prius. It is more or less a socket that goes on the end of your oil filter and helps you to turn it. This one's not a great fit, but once we get it loose, that's all that we really need. Now we can loosen that by hand and collect the oil, switch out to the new filter. Doing the filter is a little bit more of a mess. It's great to have a glove on because it is going to do that and just be kind of gross. Not a whole lot you can do about that. You just have to embrace the fact that you're going to get a little bit covered in dinosaur oil. Whew, all right. One important note, make sure that your engine oil is not too hot. So if you've just driven for like an hour, give the car a little bit of time before you go to do the oil change. Otherwise, stuff like that could burn you. In this case, it's just refreshingly warm. So we're going to let that drip for a second, then clean it off and put the new oil filter on. One really important point is to make sure that this O-ring, which I'll show you on the new filter as well, did not stay lodged here. If it did, then your new filter won't seal correctly and you'll run out of oil while you're driving, which will quite possibly ruin your engine. So one thing that's handy is to compare the dimensions of your old and new filters. Make sure that they look like they're basically the same product. Here you can see that O-ring that I'm talking about. When they're new, they're pretty obvious, and when they're old, they're kind of squashed down. But you'll want to make sure that that's the same. Always good to do a visual check. And then it is recommended that you apply some oil here and here. So we're just going to use our new oil and do that real quick to sort of pre-lube the filter. Some people will actually fill the filter up a little bit so that the engine doesn't run dry without oil for a few moments while it pressurizes the system and pumps fluid through here. I usually just do a little bit like that and call it good. As far as the anatomy of an oil filter, you've got your O-ring here, which is going to prevent oil from leaking out of the engine just onto the ground. And then you have this valve, sort of that light brown or pinkish color. That is an oil drainback valve, so it keeps the oil from coming out of the inside of this chamber, so that, similar to first startup after you've done an oil change, it doesn't run dry for a little bit every single time. So we'll slide this on, and then we'll be ready to fill up the new oil from the top of the engine. So for these, they just screw them on until they start to get tight, and then it's recommended to turn them about 3/4 of a turn to a full turn. Unfortunately, I got some oil on it, so it's a little slippery. Alright. So that's pretty close. And then I'll try to use this to give it that little bit extra. Alright, again, you've got that rubber gasket that's making the seal, and we're going to check it when we actually start the motor back up with the fresh engine oil in it. So let's go topside and add that oil. Here's our engine oil drain plug, so we're just going to pop that off. Drop a funnel down in there, which I recommend so that everything stays nice and clean in here. And then put in the amount of fluid specified in the manual, which is about 4 quarts in this case. Now on this, you can always put in a little less and then use the dipstick and top it off to get the right amount. Just kind of get a feel for it over time, but it is easy to check. Okay, I'm going to call that good and test the car, make sure that there's no leaks, and check and see if it needs a little bit extra. So we'll just put the oil cap back on. And now we're ready to fire it up. Alright, so we've got the car running. It's a Prius, so it's a little hard to check, but we slide under here. You see there's no leaks there. So far no leaks there. Ideally you'd want to give this probably a minute or something, and just make sure there's nothing obvious. If there were a major problem, then we'd have issues already. You'll want to take a look for that, make sure you don't have any oil leaks, and then you can come up to the top and use your oil dipstick, which you'll have to find on your own car, but it's here for this car, and verify that you have the right amount of oil. I'm assuming that everybody knows how to read a dipstick, but if you don't, at the end of your engine oil dipstick there's going to be either 2 dots like we have here, or some hash marks. It may have words like fill and full on one side, but basically this left hand dot is the bottom dot. You don't want your oil level to be below it at any time. Any range between these 2 dots is acceptable. You do not want it to be any higher than the top dot. So if your engine oil is towards the low dot, definitely want to give it a bump so that it stays up near the top. If you're over the top by a little bit, it's not going to hurt anything, but if you're over the top significantly, it can actually cause some problems with your engine. So you'll want to be, looking for that. I guess I can demonstrate it real quick. You're going to stick the dipstick down in there, pull it back out, and then look at the oil level. It's hard to see in the video, but you'll see the oil level comes up to about here. I'll put an arrow in the video, and doesn't quite make it all the way up to the full, but it's well within the range there that is considered good. I'm not going to mess with that. That's close enough for me. You will want to notate that it's at that range, because in theory you're supposed to check your oil periodically. If you don't have any leaks, I feel like it's less of a concern, but you'll want to make sure that the engine oil level hasn't dropped down from that a whole lot. Otherwise you'll be able to learn that your engine maybe has some seals inside that are starting to wear down, and it's beginning to consume oil. Burn it with the gas and send it out the tailpipe. So you won't notice that if it's a small leak, and the best way to find out is to check your dipstick every couple of months and see how your engine is doing on oil, if it's got any leaks anywhere. So that completes the oil change process on this 2008 Toyota Prius. I'll show you on my 1989 Honda Civic Si, which is hanging out over there at the side of the street, that in the past 20 or 30 years, the parts and processes really haven't changed any at all. Alright, so we've just stepped back in time about 20 years, 2 decades. Here is my 1989 Honda Civic. You'll see that it's got an oil drain plug right here. It's basically the same deal. You've got your 2 little dots. You want to stay in between them. That oil on the bottom of that is looking pretty gnarly, so I've not gone over the recommended number of miles, but by the time limit version, it's a little bit behind. You'll see here we've got the oil pan, we've got an oil drain plug. This car used to be raced, so I don't know if you can see it, but it's actually got holes drilled so that you can run a metal tie so that it won't come unscrewed through vibrations or terrible luck. Oh, and this one's this one's oil filter is actually in sort of a hard to reach location. It is up here, right here. But it's the same process. We're gonna drain the oil from the plug, put the plug back in, pull out the filter, get any of the oil that's in it, clean that up, put a new filter in, and then we'll have the bottom all sealed back up, put oil on the top, and check it. So that is the process that we've got, and as you can see, not a whole lot's changed over the years. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and found something that will help you when you work on your own car. I know that a lot of us drift guys have been doing this for a long time and have a fair amount of skill built up, but for me anyway, and for my team, one of the things that we really like to do is share our knowledge with the younger generation and guys who are just getting into the sport, and try and help them level up and continue our sport, because we need more people getting into it. We need to grow the scene and keep it healthy. So if you like the video, give me a like. If you've not subscribed already, please do. We'll continue producing content, and probably in my next video I'll get to show you something pretty gnarly: oil changes on my LS drift car. So I use a whole different system, and I actually pull the oil out from the top, and I'll cover that and show you what I do and how I do it how easy it is in the next video. One quick thing I forgot to mention, if you would like to see a garage tour, I've not done that for you guys yet. If you'd like to see some walkthrough of my cars, I've got my daily driver here, my drift car, no AC life yo, and then my wife's car, anything like that. If there's content you want to see, any questions you got, any of the knickknacks in the garage, etc., feel free to hit me up with a comment and we can look at it. Cheers.